If you've ever experienced a soft tissue injury, so muscle, ligament or tendon, sprain, strain or tear, then you've probably at some point been advised to follow the R.I.C.E protocol, R-I-C-E, or at least some aspects of that. And R.I.C.E stands for rest, ice, compression and elevation, and is a term that was coined back in 1978 by Dr. Gabe Mirkin in his best-selling book Sports Medicine. So this advice has been around for well over 4 decades now, and it's still very commonly in use today and recommended by a lot of medical professionals and sports people and also amateur runners alike. And basically the research that's been done more recently, should we say over the last few years, has proven this to be not only an ineffective treatment, but can actually be a damaging treatment as well. And to the extent that even back in 2015, Dr. Mirkin published an article on his website rescinding his original advice based on the more recent research. So let's take a look at what R.I.C.E actually stands for and why it's not actually the best way forward. So R.I.C.E, the first part, R, stands for rest. And the idea here is about getting complete rest of the affected area to give it a chance to heal properly. And what's actually happening when you're doing that is you're shutting down your body's natural ability to clear away the sort of the swelling, the fluid in the area that your body needs to eliminate. And the way your body does that is through the use of your lymphatic system. But your lymphatic system is reliant on the propulsive force of muscles, your skeletal muscles contracting and relaxing to squeeze the lymph back through the system. So if you're resting and shutting down that system, your body's unable now to clear away the lymph and the fluid buildup. So that's the R component. Then we have I, which stands for ice. Now, ice, which probably came into effect or into popularity because it has a very sort of quick analgesic effect. So if you imagine a professional athlete out on the field, on the pitch, performing, and then they have a minor tear, a tumble, a problem, getting them off and icing the area is a really good way of getting that pain down so that they can get back to playing as quickly as possible. So, obviously you don't want to keep your star player off, you want to get them back on the pitch as soon as possible. So the ice is a way of helping to reduce the pain that then allows them to rejoin the match and continue playing. But what happens when we have an injury is our body releases inflammatory cells called macrophages, which release a hormone called insulin-like growth hormone, or insulin-like growth factor, so IGF-1. And when you apply ice to an area, this basically reduces the ability of those cells to release IGF-1 to help with the inflammation and the damage in the area. What also happens when you apply ice is that you cause constriction in the blood vessels around the area where the ice is applied. Now this constriction, which means basically the sort of closing up of those blood vessels, reduces the blood flow to the area. And in extreme cases, that can actually result in tissue death. So that's why ice is definitely no longer a recommended treatment to over the longer term, should we say, at least. Like the initial analgesic effect is still appropriate and can be used, but a longer term ice application can actually cause more problems than it's designed to help. And then we have the two remaining components. So compression is the next one. Compression basically means by basically applying compression to the area, so wrapping in tight bandage or compression bandage, etc. And that in itself there's no evidence to say that's a wrong thing to do or a bad thing to do, but equally there's no evidence to say it's it's a good thing either. So with compression, the jury's still out on that one. If it's something you find useful, then no, please do go ahead and use it. But if not, there's no need to be using it. The one thing I find with compression that is worth considering is instead of resting, we actually want to move the area, and compression can help with supporting the area whilst we continue to move it through a range of motion. So that's one reason to consider using compression. And the final element is the elevations. This means raising the affected part above the level of your heart, basically, to encourage flow of lymph back using gravity. And again, there's no evidence to suggest it's got any real benefit, but there's also equally no evidence to say it's a bad thing to do. So if you find it beneficial, then no problem in continue using that. So if R.I.C.E is no longer an effective treatment, what can we use instead? And my preferred protocol is MEAT, M-E-A-T, and I'll take you through what each of those steps mean now instead. So the first part, M, is about movement. So rather than resting the area, because we want to maintain the operation of our lymphatic system, we want to keep moving the affected area. So if that's a joint, then we want to try and move through as much of a range of motion of that joint as possible. So if pain is your indicator of further damage occurring through that movement, then we want to maintain a pain-free range of motion. And as we start to move that area, we want to sort of build on that over time and try to increase that range of motion. Again, the key here is to remain pain-free while we're doing that. So that's the first step, so maintaining movement. The second part, E, stands for exercise. So as soon as possible, once we've got some range of movement back in there, we want to return to some resistance-based exercise. And typically what that means is using eccentric motion particularly. So eccentric is where you're loading the muscle, but loading it whilst you're lengthening it. So if, for example, we were looking at a bicep curl, we've got that, the contraction is where we're shortening the bicep, and then the lengthening is the eccentric motion there. So we'd be working on loading it in that motion rather than in the concentric range. And that's a way to build up on that, rebuild that strength through resistance work without risking too much damage, which the concentric motion could trigger more so. The next part of the protocol is A, that stands for analgesia, so pain relief. So again, we talked earlier about how applying ice can have an analgesic effect, and that's okay. Now, ice is appropriate in the immediate aftermath of an injury. So straight away after you've experienced the injury, by all means, apply ice for sort of 5 to 10 minutes, and then remove for at least 20 minutes before reapplying, and only do that once or twice. And then in terms of continued analgesia, then we're looking at painkillers such as paracetamol. And the reason we'd avoid things like ibuprofen, naproxen, diclofenac is that they are anti-inflammatory painkillers. And in the same way as where we talked about the effect of ice taking away the body's natural anti-inflammatory ability, these anti-inflammatory painkillers will do the same thing. So they'll actually slow down that healing process. So avoid the anti-inflammatories and stick with non-anti-inflammatory painkillers like paracetamol. And then the final part, the T part, is treatment. So this is about getting appropriate treatment depending on the injury. Now, treatment could mean different things for different types of injuries, but for example, could be including things like sports massage, it could be acupuncture, it could be taping, whatever the sort of appropriate treatment is for the particular injury that you're dealing with. But treatment can also include sort of helping your body's natural ability to heal and repair. So things like supplements that improve that ability. So, basic multivitamins, multiminerals to encourage your body to be able to perform at its best. These sort of things are a really good supplement to help with recovery from soft tissue injury. So that's the alternative, or my proposed alternative is to follow the MEAT protocol instead of the R.I.C.E protocol. And MEAT is basically what I use for my own injuries. If I do experience any soft tissue injuries, MEAT is the protocol that I follow to handle those injuries myself. And I found it very effective for my own issues. And I haven't used the R.I.C.E protocol for many years now. So yeah, so there you go. Just giving you an alternative to using the R.I.C.E protocol, and hopefully a bit more information as to why R.I.C.E is no longer the recommended approach to treating soft tissue injuries. So I'd love to hear what you think of this, and are you still using R.I.C.E for yourself, or are you still recommending R.I.C.E to other people? And what do you think of the meat protocol instead of R.I.C.E, and what would you be using in the future, based on what you've heard in this video. So if you'd like to, please drop me a comment down below, or send me an email, a message, anything. Get in touch lots of different ways. I'd love to hear from you, love to hear your experience, and I'll be back next week with another video and more information then. So until then, happy running and bye for now.